seen the joint chambers, the two chambers come together in joint session. We're seeing assorted members of Congress, members of the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, the Chief Justice John Roberts. We're seeing a parade of and Justice Stephen Breyer, who is retiring at the end of this term of the Supreme Court. We've been reporting on the nomination of the first black woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson, to take Justice Breyer's place, and those confirmation hearings will be coming up in several weeks. But let's bring in some of our correspondents and analysts. Lisa Desjardins, you are there in the House chamber. You've got a bird's eye view of what's going on. Tell us what you're seeing that we should know about.
Well, it looks like they're running a few minutes behind. That's not a shock. This is the first time many of these members have been able to interact in this form, literally in years. There are few masks in this chamber. That's because the mask requirement was lifted just today because of the situation with COVID here in the District of Columbia, low enough to allow that. Also, every person in this chamber had to test negative in the past day in order to be here. There will be a great show, I think, of support for Ukraine. I see members holding flags. Those were given out by one of the Republican members of Congress. You will see a lot of yellow, a lot of blue. I also have noticed some interesting bipartisan moments. One of the president's chief advisors, Louisa Terrell, hugging the chief of staff for Republican Senator Mitch McConnell. So some of these moments that you see actually matter in terms of relationships at a time like this. A big speech, but I think more than anything, this feels like a sense of normal that many of these members have wanted, to just be able to gather together in this chamber.
So many things coming together at the same time, Lisa, as you say, people wanting so badly to get back to normal, to shake off the restrictions of COVID. But as we've been reporting now for several days, this speech comes in the middle of a crisis around the globe, in Ukraine, where the Russians have invaded that sovereign country and are marching on their way to take over, in their attempt to take over cities, and as they've said, their goal is to take over the government. We are still waiting for President Biden. We're keeping an eye out on the House chamber, waiting for President Biden to arrive. Amna Nawaz, as we said, is at the Capitol in the Cannon House office building. And Amna, I think you've been reporting for the last, well, ever since the invasion happened, and trying to get a sense of international reaction to it. This is one of the rare times when news that is not centered right here in the United States is going to be front and center at a State of the Union.
You're absolutely right, Judy. I mean, the confluence of factors that have to be top priorities for the president right now is really unprecedented. I mean, think about it. He's talking during a time of pandemic recovery after a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-century pandemic.
Going to interrupt you, Amna, just one second.
I'll toss it back to you, Judy.
Come right back to you in a minute. We've just heard the President of the United States announced by General William Walker. He's the House Sergeant at Arms. And here comes President Biden greeting members of Congress, many of whom he knows. He served for more than 3 decades in the Senate. He knows many of these members on both sides of the aisle there. You see him greeting many of them personally. And as Lisa Desjardins pointed out, this is one of the only times we've seen members of Congress, or certainly that we've seen the president without a mask in a large setting like this. But Amna, I want to come back to you. I didn't mean to interrupt you making the point that you were about how unusual it is that this terrible conflict in Ukraine is going to be frankly subject number one for the State of the Union.
That's absolutely right, Judy. It sets up a real challenge for the president, right? Because this is chiefly meant to be an address to the American people, sort of a victory lap after his first year. And so many of the same challenges the president came into office and inherited and stepped into remain with him today. And now on top of that, you have this world-altering event with the Russian invasion into Ukraine. What strikes me as I'm watching this feed, though, is the number of Ukrainian flags you see lawmakers holding. the number of lawmakers who are wearing blue and yellow in solidarity with Ukraine. And I should also say I've been getting messages from some of my contacts on the ground in Ukraine who are watching this tonight, are watching our live stream and staying up late. It's 4 in the morning in Kyiv right now, and they wanted to be able to see what President Biden has to say live. So the challenge for him is enormous. He has to both message to an American public who are pandemic weary, who are dealing with record inflation, and also speak to the rest of the world about how the U.S. is going to continue to lead, continue to rally those NATO and Western allies and deter Russia in the midst of this ongoing invasion in Ukraine. And we should mention, too, foreign policy is something that's not typically high on Americans' list as a recommended and a wanted priority for the president, but lately it does rank up there. Obviously, the economy and inflation are the top concern for Americans, but in the sort of quartet of issues that follow, Americans still say foreign policy is something that they want the president to pay attention to and should be a priority.
Amna Nawaz watching it all from the Cannon House office building. You see the president receiving a warm greeting there in the House chamber. Both Democrats and Republicans, all of them seem to be standing and applauding as they wait for the president to speak.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Please. Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, members of Congress and the Cabinet, Justices of the Supreme Court, my fellow Americans. Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, we meet as Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, but most importantly, as Americans, with the duty to one another, to America, to the American people, to the Constitution, and an unwavering resolve that freedom will always triumph over tyranny. Thank you. 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. President Zelensky, to every Ukrainian, their fearlessness, their courage, their determination literally inspires the world. Groups of citizens blocking tanks with their bodies, everyone from students to retirees to teachers, turned soldiers defending their homeland. And in this struggle, President Zelensky said in his speech to the European Parliament, "Light will win over darkness." The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States is here tonight, sitting with the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bright, she's strong, and she's resolved. Yes. We, the United States of America, stand with the Ukrainian people. Throughout our history, we've learned this lesson. When dictators do not pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos. They keep moving, and the cost, the threats to America and America to the world keeps rising. That's why the NATO alliance was created, to secure peace and stability in Europe after World War II. The United States is a member, along with 29 other nations. It matters. American diplomacy matters. American resolve matters. Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. He rejected repeated efforts at diplomacy. He thought the West and NATO wouldn't respond. He thought he could divide us at home, in this chamber, in this nation. He thought he could divide us in Europe as well. But Putin was wrong. We are ready. We are united, and that's what we did. We stayed united. We prepared extensively and carefully. We spent months building coalitions of other freedom-loving nations in Europe and the Americas, from America to the Asian and African continents, to confront Putin. Like many of you, I spent countless hours unifying our European allies. We shared with the world in advance what we knew Putin was planning and precisely how we would try to falsify and justify his aggression. We countered Russia's lies with the truth. And now that he's acted, the free world is holding him accountable, along with 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and many others. Even Switzerland are inflicting pain on Russia and supporting the people of Ukraine. Putin is now isolated from the world more than he has ever been. Together, along with our allies, we are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. To technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. Tonight, I say to the Russian oligarchs and the corrupt leaders who built billions of dollars off this violent regime, no more. The United States, I mean it. The United States Department of Justice is assembling a dedicated task force to go after the crimes of the Russian oligarchs. We're joining with European allies to find and seize their yachts, their luxury apartments, their private jets. We're coming for your ill-begotten gains. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. Together with our allies, we're providing support to the Ukrainians in their fight for freedom. Military assistance, economic assistance, humanitarian assistance. We're giving more than $1 billion of direct assistance to Ukraine, and will continue to aid the Ukrainian people as they defend their country and help ease their suffering. But let me be clear, our forces are not engaged and will not engage in the conflict with Russian forces in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight Ukraine. but to defend our NATO allies in the event that Putin decides to keep moving west. For that purpose, we have mobilized American ground forces, air squadrons, ship deployments to protect NATO countries including Poland, Romania, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And as I've made crystal clear, the United States and our allies will defend every inch of territory that is NATO territory with the full force of our collective power. Every single inch. And we're clear-eyed. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage. But the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them. Putin has unleashed violence and chaos. But while he may make gains on the battlefield, he'll pay a continuing high price over the long run. And a pound of Ukrainian people, proud, proud people, pound for pound, ready to fight with every inch of energy they have. They've known 30 years of independence, have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world. And I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at Russian economy, and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers. Tonight, I can announce the United States has worked with 30 other countries to release 60 million barrels of oil from reserves around the world. America will lead that effort, releasing 30 million barrels of our own strategic petroleum reserve. And we stand ready to do more if necessary, united with our allies. These steps will help blunt gas prices here at home, but I know news about what's happening can seem alarming to all Americans. But I want you to know, we're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. When the history of this era is written, Putin's war in Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Well, while it shouldn't have taken something so terrible for people around the world to see what's at stake, now everyone sees it clearly. We see the unity among leaders of nations, a more unified Europe, a more unified West. We see unity among the people who are gathering in cities and large crowds around the world, even in Russia, to demonstrate their support for the people of Ukraine. In the battle between democracy and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment, and the world is clearly choosing the side of peace and security. This is the real test, and it's going to take time. So let us continue to draw inspiration from the iron will of the Ukrainian people. To our fellow Ukrainian Americans who forged the deep bond that connects our two nations, we stand with you. We stand with you. Putin may circle Kyiv with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. He'll never extinguish their love of freedom, and he will never weaken the resolve of the free world. We meet tonight in an America that has lived through two of the hardest years this nation has ever faced. The pandemic has been punishing, and so many families are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to keep up with the rising cost of food, gas, housing, and so much more. I understand, like many of you did. My dad had to leave his home in Scranton, Pennsylvania to find work. So like many of you, I grew up in a family when the price of food went up, it was felt throughout the family. It had an impact. That's when one of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. Because people were hurting. We needed to act, and we did. Few pieces of legislation have done more at a critical moment in our history to lift us out of a crisis. It fueled our efforts to vaccinate the nation and combat COVID-19, delivered immediate economic relief to tens of millions of Americans. It helped put food on the table, Remember those long lines of cars waiting for hours just to get a box of food put in their trunk? It cut the cost of health care insurance. And as my dad used to say, it gave the people just a little bit of breathing room. Unlike the $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration that benefited the top 1% of Americans, the American Rescue Plan helped working people and left no one behind. Folks, and it worked. It worked. It worked. We created jobs, lots of jobs. In fact, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year. More jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States of America. The economy grew at a rate of 5.7 last year, the strongest growth rate in 40 years. And the first step in bringing fundamental change to our economy that hasn't worked for working people in this nation for too long. For the past 40 years, we were told that tax break for those at the top and benefits would trickle down and everyone would benefit. But that trickle-down theory led to a weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits, and a widening gap between the top and everyone else in nearly a century. Look, Vice President Harris and I ran for office, and I realize we have fundamental disagreements on this, but ran for office with a new economic vision for America. Invest in America, educate Americans, grow the workforce, build the economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, because we know when the middle class grows, the poor have a way up and the wealthy do very well. America used to have the best roads, bridges, and airports on earth, and now our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. We won't be able to compete for the jobs of the 21st century if we don't fix it. That's why it was so important to pass the bipartisan infrastructure law. And I thank my Republican friends who joined to invest and rebuild America, the single biggest investment in history. It was a bipartisan effort, and I want to thank the members of both parties who worked to make it happen. We're done talking about infrastructure weeks. We're now talking about an infrastructure decade. And look, it's going to transform America, to put us on a path to win the economic competition of the 21st century that we face with the rest of the world, particularly China. I've told Xi Jinping it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. We'll create good jobs for millions of Americans, modernizing roads, airports, ports, waterways, all across America. And we'll do it to withstand the devastating effects of climate change and promote environmental justice. We'll build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Begin to replace the poisonous lead pipes so every child, every American has clean water to drink at home and at school. We're going to provide affordable, high-speed internet for every American, rural, suburban, urban, and tribal communities. 4,000 projects have already been announced. Many of you have announced them in your districts. And tonight, I'm announcing that this year, we will start fixing over 65,000 miles of highway and 1,500 bridges in disrepair. And folks, when we use taxpayers' dollars to rebuild America, we're going to do it by buying America. Buy American products. Support American jobs. The federal government spends about $600 billion a year to keep this country safe and secure. There's been a law on the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration, Democrat or Republican, says they'll do it, but we're actually doing it. We'll buy America to make sure everything from the deck of an aircraft carrier to the steel on highway guardrails is made in America from beginning to end. All of it. All of it. But folks, to compete for the jobs of the future, we also need a level playing field with China and other competitors. That's why it's so important to pass the Bipartisan Innovation Act sitting in Congress that will make record investments in emerging technologies and American manufacturing. We used to invest almost 2% of our GDP in research and development. We don't now. China is. Let me give you one example why it's so important to pass. If you travel 20 miles east of Columbus, Ohio, you'll find 1,000 empty acres of land. It won't look like much, but if you stop and look closely, you'll see a field of dreams, the ground on which America's future will be built. That's where Intel, the American company that helped build Silicon Valley, is going to build a $20 billion semiconductor megasite, up to 8 state-of-the-art factories in one place, 10,000 new jobs. And in those factories, the average job about $135,000 a year. Some of the most sophisticated manufacturing in the world to make computer chips the size of a fingertip, that power the world in everyday lives, from smartphones, technology, the internet, technology that's yet to be invented. But that's just the beginning. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger, who is here tonight, I don't know where Pat is. Pat, there you go, Pat, stand up. Pat came to see me and he told me they're ready to increase their investment from $20 billion to $100 billion. That would be the biggest investment in manufacturing in American history. And all they're waiting for is for you to pass this bill. So let's not wait any longer. Send it to my desk, I'll sign it, and we'll really take off in a big way. And folks, Intel is not alone. There's something happening in America. Just look around and you'll see an amazing story. The rebirth of pride that comes from stamping products made in America. The revitalization of American manufacturing. Companies are choosing to build new factories here when just a few years ago they would have gone overseas. That's what's happening. Ford is investing $11 billion in electric vehicles, creating 11,000 jobs across the country. GM is making the largest investment in its history, $7 billion to build electric vehicles, creating 4,000 jobs in Michigan. All told, 369,000 new manufacturing jobs were created in America last year alone. Folks, powered by people I've met like JoJo Burgess from generations of union steelworkers in Pittsburgh, who's here with us tonight. Where are you, JoJo? There you go. Thanks, buddy. As Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says, it's time to bury the label Rust Belt. It's time to see the what used to be called the Rust Belt become the home of a significant resurgence of manufacturing. And with all the bright spots in our economy, record job growth, higher wages, too many families are struggling to keep up with their bills. Inflation is robbing them of gains they thought otherwise they would be able to feel. I get it. That's why my top priority is getting prices under control. Look, our economy roared back faster than almost anyone predicted. But the pandemic meant that businesses had a hard time hiring enough people because of the pandemic to keep up production in their factories. So you didn't have people making those beams that went into buildings because they were out. The factory was closed. The panic also disrupted the global supply chain. Factories close. When that happens, it takes longer to make goods and get them to the warehouses, to the stores, and prices go up. Look at cars last year. 1/3 of all the inflation was because of automobile sales. There weren't enough semiconductors to make all the cars that people wanted to buy. And guess what? Prices of automobiles went way up, especially used vehicles as well. And so we have a choice. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages. Folks, that means make more cars and semiconductors in America, more infrastructure and innovation in America, more goods moving faster and cheaper in America, more jobs where you can earn a good living in America. Instead of relying on foreign supply chains, let's make it in America. Look, economists call this increasing the productive capacity of our economy. I call it building a better America. My plan to fight inflation will lower your costs and lower the deficit. 17 Nobel laureates in economics said my plan will ease long-term inflationary pressures. Top business leaders, and I believe most Americans, support the plan. And here's the plan. First, cut the cost of prescription drugs. We pay more for the same drug produced by the same company in America than any other country in the world. Just look at insulin. 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. In Virginia, I met a 13-year-old boy, the handsome young man standing up there, Joshua Davis. He and his dad both have type 1 diabetes, which means they need insulin every single day. Insulin costs about $10 a vial to make. That's what it costs the pharmaceutical company. But drug companies charge families like Joshua and his dad up to 30 times that amount. I spoke with Joshua's mom. Imagine what it's like to look at your child who needs insulin to stay healthy and have no idea how in God's name you're going to be able to pay for it. What it does to your family, but what it does to your dignity, your ability to look your child in the eye, to be the parent you expect yourself to be. I really mean to think about that. That's what I think about. You know, yesterday, Joshua's here tonight, but yesterday was his birthday. Happy birthday, buddy, by the way. For Joshua and 200,000 other young people with type 1 diabetes, let's cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month, so everyone can afford it. And drug companies will do very, very well, their profit margin. While we're at it, I know we have great disagreements on this floor with this. Let's let Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs. They already set the price for VA drugs. Look, the American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families with Affordable Care Act plans to save them $2,400 a year on their health premiums. Let's close the coverage gap and make these savings permanent. And second, Let's cut energy costs for families, an average of $500 a year by combating climate change. Let's provide an investment tax credits to weatherize your home and your business, to be energy efficient and get a tax credit for it. Double America's clean energy production in solar, wind, and so much more. Lower the price of electric vehicles, saving another $80 a month that you're not going to have to pay at the pump. Folks, the third thing we can do to change the standard of living for hard-working folks is cut the cost of child care. Cut the cost of child care. Folks, if you live in a major city in America, you pay up to $14,000 a year for child care per child. I was a single dad for 5 years, raising 2 kids. I had a lot of help, though. I had a mom, a dad, a brother, and a sister that really helped. But middle class and working folks shouldn't have to pay more than 7% of their income to care for the young children. My plan would cut the cost of child care in half for most families and help parents, including millions of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they couldn't afford child care, to be able to get back to work, generating economic growth. But my plan doesn't stop there. It also includes home and long-term care, more affordable housing, pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. All these will lower costs to families. And under my plan, nobody, let me say this again, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in new taxes. Not a single penny. I may be wrong, but my guess is if we took a secret ballot in this floor, that we'd all agree that the present tax system ain't fair. We have to fix it. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but let's make corporations and wealthy Americans start paying their fair share. Look, last year, and like Chris Coons and Tom Carper and my distinguished Congresswoman, we come from the land of corporate America. There are more corporations incorporated in America than every other state in America combined. And I still won 36 years in a row. The point is, even they understand they should pay just a fair share. Last year, 55 of the Fortune 500 companies earned $40 billion in profit and paid 0 in federal taxes. Now look, it's not fair. That's why I proposed a 15% minimum tax rate for corporations. And that's why in the G7 and other meetings overseas, we're able to put together, I was able to be somewhat helpful, 130 countries agree on a global minimum tax rate. So companies can't get out of paying their taxes at home by shipping jobs and factories overseas. It'll raise billions of dollars. That's why I propose closing loopholes for the very wealthy who pay a lower tax rate than a teacher and a firefighter. So that's my plan, but we'll go in more detail later. We will grow the economy, lower the cost of families. So what are we waiting for? Let's get this done. We all know we've got to make changes. Folks, and while you're at it, confirm my nominees for the Federal Reserve, which plays a critical role in fighting inflation. My plan will not only lower costs and give families a fair shot, it will lower the deficit. The previous administration not only ballooned the deficit with those tax cuts for the very wealthy and corporations, it undermined the watchdogs, the job of those to keep pandemic relief funds being wasted. Remember we had those debates about whether or not those watchdogs should be able to see every day how much money was being spent, where was it going to the right place? But in my administration, the watchdogs are back. And we're going to go after the criminals who stole billions of relief money, meant for small business and millions of Americans. Tonight, I'm announcing that the Justice Department will soon name a chief prosecutor for pandemic fraud. Look, I think we all agree, thank you. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half of what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. Lowering your cost also meant demanding more competition. I'm a capitalist, but capitalism without competition is not capitalism. Capitalism without competition is exploitation. It drives up profits. And corporations have to compete. Their profits go up and your prices go up when they don't have to compete. Small businesses and family farmers and ranchers, I need not tell some of my Republican friends from those states. Guess what? You got 4 basic meat packing facilities. That's it. You play with them or you don't get to play at all. And you pay a hell of a lot more. A hell of a lot more because there's only 4. See what's happening with ocean carriers moving goods in and out of America. During the pandemic, about half a dozen or less foreign-owned companies raised prices by as much as 1,000% and made record profits. Tonight, I'm announcing a crackdown on those companies overcharging American businesses and consumers. Folks, and as Wall Street firms take over more nursing homes, quality in those homes has gone down and costs have gone up. That ends on my watch. Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure loved ones get the care they deserve and that they inspect and they will look at closely. We're also going to cut costs to keep the economy going strong and giving workers a fair shot, provide more training and apprenticeships, hire them based on skills, not just their degrees. Let's pass the Paycheck Fairness Act and paid leave. Raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour and extend the child tax credit so no one has to raise a family in poverty. Let's increase Pell Grants, increase our historic support for HBCUs, and invest in what Jill, our First Lady who teaches full-time, calls America's best-kept secret, community colleges. Look, let's pass the PRO Act. When a majority of workers want to form a union, they shouldn't be able to be stopped. When we invest in our workers and we build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out together, we can do something we haven't done in a long time, build a better America. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. And I know you're tired, frustrated, and exhausted. That doesn't even count the close to 1 million people who sit at a dining room table or a kitchen table and look at an empty chair because they lost somebody. But I also know this, because of the progress we've made, because of your resilience and the tools that we have been provided by this Congress, tonight I can say we're moving forward safely back to a more normal routines. We've reached a new moment in the fight against COVID-19, where severe cases are down to a level not seen since July of last year. Just a few days ago, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a new mask guidelines. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free. And based on projections, more of the country will reach a point across the next couple of weeks. And thanks to the progress we've made in the past year, COVID-19 no longer need control our lives. I know some are talking about living with COVID-19, but tonight I say that we never will just accept living with COVID-19. We'll continue to combat the virus as we do other diseases. And because this virus mutates and spreads, we have to stay on guard. And here are 4 common sense steps as we move forward safely, in my view. First, stay protected with vaccines and treatments. We know how incredibly effective vaccines are. If you're vaccinated and boosted, you have the highest degree of protection. We'll never give up on vaccinating more Americans. Now, I know parents with kids under 5 are eager to see their vaccines authorized for their children. Scientists are working hard to get that done. We'll be ready with plenty of vaccines if and when they do. We're all ready. We are also ready with antiviral treatments. If you get COVID-19, the Pfizer pill reduces your chances of ending up in the hospital by 90%. I've ordered more pills than anyone in the world has. Pfizer is working overtime to get us 1 million pills this month and more than double that next month. And now we're launching the Test to Treat initiative. So people can get tested at a pharmacy, and if they prove positive, receive the antiviral pills on the spot at no cost. Folks, if you're immunocompromised or have some other vulnerability, we have treatments and free high-quality masks. We're leaving no one behind or ignoring anyone's needs as we move forward. On testing, we've made hundreds of millions of tests available, and you can order them for free to your doorstep. And we've already ordered free tests. If you already ordered free tests tonight, I'm announcing you can order another group of tests. Go to covidtest.gov starting next week, and you can get more tests. Second, we must prepare for new variants. Over the past, we've gotten much better at detecting new variants. If necessary, we'll be able to develop new vaccines within 100 days instead of maybe months or years. And if Congress provides the funds we need, we'll have new stockpiles of tests, masks, pills ready if needed. I can't promise a new variant won't come, but I can promise you we'll do everything within our power to be ready if it does. Third, we can end the shutdown of schools and businesses. We have the tools we need. It's time for America to get back to work and fill our great downtowns again with people. People working from home can feel safe and begin to return to their offices. We're doing that here in the federal government. The vast majority of federal workers will once again work in person. Our schools are open. Let's keep it that way. Our kids need to be in school. With 75% of adult Americans fully vaccinated and hospitalizations down by 77%, most Americans can remove their masks and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. We achieved this because we provided free vaccines, treatments, tests, and masks. Of course, continuing this costs money, so I'll not surprise you. I'll be back to see you all. And I'm going to soon send a request to Congress. The vast majority of Americans have used these tools and may want again. We may need them again, so I expect Congress, and I hope you'll pass that quickly. Fourth, we'll continue vaccinating the world. We've sent 475 million vaccine doses to 112 countries, more than any nation on earth. We won't stop because you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. The vaccine can stop the spread of these diseases. You know, we've lost so much in COVID-19. Time with one another. The worst of all, the loss of life. Let's use this moment to reset. So stop looking at COVID as a partisan dividing line. See it for what it is, a god-awful disease. Let's stop seeing each other as enemies. Start seeing each other for who we are, fellow Americans. Look, we can't change how divided we've been. It was a long time in coming. But we can change how to move forward on COVID-19 and other issues that we must face together. I recently visited New York City Police Department days after the funerals of Officer Wilbur Mora and his partner, Officer Jason Rivera. They were responding to a 9/11 call when a man shot and killed them with a stolen gun. Officer Mora was 27 years old. Officer Rivera was 22 years old. Both Dominican Americans who grew up in the same streets that they later chose to patrol as police officers. I spoke with their families, and I told them that we were forever in debt for their sacrifices, and will carry on their mission to restore the trust and safety in every community deserves. Like some of you that have been around for a while, I've worked with you on these issues for a long time. I know what works: investigating crime prevention and community policing, cops who walk the beat, who know the neighborhood, and who can restore trust and safety. Let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers. That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities. I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home, no serial numbers, can't be traced. I ask Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence. Pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines that hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield that makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. Imagine had we done that with the tobacco manufacturers. These laws don't infringe on the Second Amendment. They save lives. The most fundamental right in America is the right to vote and have it counted. And look, it's under assault. In state after state, new laws have been passed. Not only to suppress the vote, we've been there before, but to subvert the entire election. We can't let this happen. Tonight I call on the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, pass the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. And while you're at it, pass the Disclose Act so Americans know who's funding our election. Look, tonight, I'd like to honor someone who dedicated his life to serve this country. Justice Breyer, an Army veteran, constitutional scholar, retiring Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Justice Breyer, thank you for your service. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean it. Get up, stand, let them see you. Thank you. And we all know, no matter what your ideology, we all know one of the most serious constitutional responsibility a president has is nominating someone to serve on the United States Supreme Court. As I did 4 days ago, I've nominated the Circuit Court of Appeals, Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of our nation's top legal minds, who continue in Justice Breyer's legacy of excellence. A former top litigator in private practice, a former federal public defender, from a family of public school educators and police officers. She's a consensus builder. Since she's been nominated, she's received a broad range of support, including the Fraternal Order of Police and former judges supported by Democrats and Republicans. Folks, if we are to advance liberty and justice, we need to secure our border and fix the immigration system. And as you might guess, I think we can do both. At our border, we've installed new technology like cutting-edge scanners to better detect drug smuggling. We've set up joint patrols with Mexico and Guatemala to catch more human traffickers. We're putting in place dedicated immigration judges in a significant larger number so families fleeing persecution and violence can have their cases heard faster, and those who don't legitimately hear can be sent back. We're screening, we're securing commitments and supporting partners in South and Central America to host more refugees and secure their own borders. We can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led a generation of immigrants to this land, my forebears and many of yours. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those with temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Revise our laws so businesses have workers they need and families don't wait decades to reunite. It's not only the right thing to do, it's economically smart thing to do. That's why the immigration reform is supported by everyone from labor unions to religious leaders to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Let's get it done once and for all. Folks, advancing liberty and justice also requires protecting the rights of women. The constitutional right affirmed by Roe v. Wade, standing precedent for half a century, is under attack as never before. If you want to go forward, not backwards, we must protect access to health care, preserve a woman's right to choose, and continue to advance maternal health care for all Americans. And folks, for our LGBTQ plus Americans, let's finally get the Bipartisan Equality Act to my desk. The onslaught of state laws targeting transgender Americans and their families, it's simply wrong. And I said last year, especially to our younger transgender Americans, I'll always have your back as your president so you can be yourself and reach your God-given potential. Folks, as I've just demonstrated, while it often appears we do not agree, and that we do agree on a lot more things than we acknowledge. I signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year, from preventing government shutdowns, to protecting Asian Americans from still too common hate crimes, to reforming military justice, and will soon be strengthening the Violence Against Women Act that I first wrote 3 decades ago. And it's important. It's important for us to show the nation we can come together and do big things. So tonight I'm offering a unity agenda for the nation. 4 big things we can do together, in my view. First, beat the opioid epidemic. There's so much we can do. Increase funding for prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery. Get rid of outdated rules and stop doctors prescribing treatments. Stop the flow of illicit drugs by working with state and local law enforcement to go after the traffickers. And if you're suffering from addiction, you should know you're not alone. I believe in recovery, and I celebrate the 23 million Americans in recovery. Second, let's take on mental health, especially among our children whose lives and education have been turned upside down. American Rescue Plan gave schools money to hire teachers and help students make up for lost learning. I urge every parent to make sure your school does just that. They have the money. We can all play a part. Sign up to be a tutor or a mentor. Children were also struggling before the pandemic: bullying, violence, trauma, and the harms of social media. As Frances Haugen, who is here tonight with us, has shown, we must hold social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Folks, thank you. Thank you for the courage you showed. It's time to strengthen privacy protections, ban targeted advertising to children, demand tech companies stop collecting personal data on our children, and let's get all Americans the mental health services they need. More people can turn for help and full parity between physical and mental health care if we treat it that way in our insurance. Look, the third piece of that agenda is support our veterans. Veterans are the backbone and the spine of this country. They're the best of us. I've always believed that we have a sacred obligation to equip those we send to war and care for those in their family when they come home. My administration is providing assistance in job training, housing, and now helping lower-income veterans get VA care debt-free. And our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan have faced many dangers, one being stationed at bases breathing in toxic smoke from burn pits. Many of you have been there. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan over 40 times. These burn pits that incinerate waste, the waste of war, medical and hazardous material, jet fuel, and so much more. And they come home, many of the world's fittest and best trained warriors in the world. Never the same. Headaches, numbness, dizziness. A cancer that would put them in a flag-draped coffin. I know. One of those soldiers was my son, Major Bo Biden. I don't know for sure if the burn pit that he lived near, that his hooch was near, in Iraq and earlier than that in Kosovo, is the cause of his brain cancer, the disease of so many other troops. But I am committed to find out everything we can, committed to military families like Danielle Robinson from Ohio, the widow of Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson. He was born a soldier, Army National Guard, combat medic in Kosovo and Iraq, stationed near Baghdad, just yards from burn pits the size of football fields. Danielle is here with us tonight. They loved going to Ohio State football games. And he loved building Legos with their daughter. But cancer from prolonged exposure to burn pits ravaged Heath's lungs and body. Danielle says Heath was a fighter to the very end. He didn't know how to stop fighting, and neither did she. Through her pain, she found purpose to demand that we do better. Tonight, Danielle, we are going to do better. The VA is pioneering new ways of linking toxic exposure to disease, already helping more veterans get benefits. And tonight, I'm announcing we're expanding eligibility to veterans suffering from 9 respiratory cancers. I'm also calling on Congress to pass a law to make sure veterans devastated by toxic exposure in Iraq and Afghanistan finally get the benefits and the comprehensive health care they deserve. And Fourth and last, let's end cancer as we know it. This is personal. This is personal to me and to Jill and to Kamala and so many of you. So many of you have lost someone you love. Husband, wife, son, daughter, mom, dad. Cancer is the #2 cause of death in America, second only to heart disease. Last month, I announced the plan to supercharge the cancer moonshot that President Obama asked me to lead 6 years ago. Our goal is to cut cancer death rates by at least 50% over the next 25 years, and I think we can do better than that. Turn cancers from death sentences into treatable diseases. More support for patients and their families. To get there, I call on Congress to fund what I call ARPA-H, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, patterned after DARPA in the Defense Department. Projects that led in DARPA to the internet, GPS, and so much more to make our forces more safer and be able to wage war with more clarity. ARPA will have a singular purpose: to drive breakthroughs in cancer, Alzheimer's and diabetes, and more. A unity agenda for the nation. We can do these things. It's within our power, and I don't see a partisan edge to any one of those 4 things. My fellow Americans, tonight, we've gathered in this sacred space, a citadel of democracy, in this Capitol. Generation after generation of Americans have debated great questions amid great strife and have done great things. We fought for freedom, expanded liberty, debated totalitarianism and terror. We built the strongest, freest, and most prosperous nation the world has ever known. Now is the hour, our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. It is in this moment that our character of this generation is formed. Our purpose is found. Our future is forged. Well, I know this nation. We'll meet the test, protect freedom and liberty, expand fairness and opportunity, and we will save democracy. As hard as those times have been, I'm more optimistic about America today than I've been my whole life, because I see the future that's within our grasp, because I know there's simply nothing beyond our capacity. We're the only nation on earth that has always turned every crisis we've faced into an opportunity. The only nation that can be defined by a single word: possibilities. So on this night, on our 245th year as a nation, I've come to report on the state of the nation, the State of the Union. And my report is this: the State of the Union is strong because you, the American people, are strong. We are stronger today. We are stronger today than we were a year ago. And we'll be stronger a year from now than we are today. This is our moment to meet and overcome the challenges of our time. And we will, as one people, one America, the United States of America. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you. Go get him.
President Biden thanking House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, shaking hands with her and with Vice President Kamala Harris after a 1 hour and 2 minute State of the Union address, starting out on Ukraine, rallying Americans to support the Ukrainian people who are right now struggling to survive against a Russian onslaught. The president moving on after 15, 20 minutes of talking about Ukraine, moving on to talk about the challenges of his administration. Domestic, health care, voting rights, the strength of the country, and then as you hear in the last few moments of the speech, coming back to democracy, and calling on the nation to come together, saying this is our moment of responsibility, our test of resolve and conscience, of history itself. He said it is in this moment that our character is formed, a character of this generation, our purpose is found, our future is forged. The president making a point to appeal to unity at a time when the country is so clearly divided politically. As we watch President Biden leave the House chamber, greeting House members, Senate members, Pramila Jayapal, who leads the Progressive Caucus in the House, greeting members of the Senate. We saw Democrats cheering more than we did Republicans, but there were times when we saw people across both sides of the House chamber cheering. We have correspondents joining us as we watch President Biden leave. We also have our analyst, Jonathan Capehart with the Washington Post, Peter Wehner, who writes for the Atlantic magazine. Jonathan Capehart, I want to come to you. I was struck that the president used Ukraine in the beginning to bring the country together, and then as he wrapped up the speech, again appealed for unity, appealed to Americans to work across our political divide.
And you know, the word that connects those two, the beginning and the end, is democracy. The focus on Ukraine was the focus on a people who have a democratically elected government that is now under siege by a country run by a dictator. The fact that the president spent the first 12 minutes, and I was keeping tabs, first 12 minutes of his speech talking about Ukraine, lauding the spirit and the courage of the Ukrainian people, while at the same time earning bipartisan standing ovations from Democrats and Republicans for the words he was saying, the support he was giving to the Ukrainian people. And then at the end of the speech, throughout the campaign, Judy, the one time I always saw Joe Biden, candidate Joe Biden and President Joe Biden get animated, passionate, fiery, is when he is talking about the American people and American democracy and what we can do and what we can achieve when we are united as a people. And so when you look at these two bookends of the speech, what we heard is a president who is committed in his bones to democracy at home and abroad.
And that theme of unity, as we've just been talking about, ran through the speech in many ways. I just want to say we're watching President Biden linger, I think perhaps longer than other presidents have, leaving the chamber. This is someone who spent 36 years in the United States Senate. He paid tribute to Justice Stephen Breyer, who you can see standing there to speak with him before he leaves the chamber. This is someone who is familiar with this body, with the Senate, with the House, having served in the Senate. But these, I think you see the warmth of the friendship between the president and Justice Breyer, who himself worked in the United States Senate. He was a legal advisor to the late Senator Edward Kennedy. But I want to bring in Peter Wehner quickly and ask you about what the president had to say, Pete Wehner, about what he called a unity agenda. He said, I think we can work together on cancer. We can work together, he said, on veterans, on mental health, on defeating the opioid epidemic. Is that realistic?
I think it is realistic. I think I'd say a couple things about the speech. I thought the emotional high point was at the beginning. He talked about Ukraine. And I think he tapped into something which we've all seen, which is that this moment we've seen from the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky is an honor and courage still to stir the human heart. And we've seen that in Ukraine, but we've seen it in this country too. And I think he read that moment correctly. Where I would fault the speech is, I think after that, it really lost altitude. And I think, to me, it was the problem with Joe Biden, one of the problems with Joe Biden, which is he has a legislator's mindset this was just a litany of things. And, you know, Jonathan may be right. The beginning, the bookends of the speech may have been good, but I'm not sure how many people hung around and were focused at the end. The other thing I'd say is, if I were a Democrat, I'd be somewhat concerned, because this, as we discussed at the beginning, could have been a course correction for his presidency, because this is a wounded presidency. And I don't think that was it. This was not a kind of Bill Clinton, the era of big government has ended. This was more Joe Biden saying, we've achieved a lot and I should get better credit than I have. So the good things that were in the speech, the bipartisan parts, even the moving parts with Beau Biden, I think just got buried under a whole litany of things that really had no prioritization.
Lisa Desjardins, you were there. You're there in the chamber, able to watch not only the president, but the reaction. What did you see?
Well, first of all, I have to say, Democrats did a good job of trying to push back the notion of an enthusiasm gap. Their cheering was something that was almost deafening at times, and it felt authentic. However, you could see, I don't know if it was the 12 minutes in that Jonathan just mentioned or somewhere around there, Republicans stopped clapping even for notions that I know they support. Things like buying American products. At some point, they weren't even clapping for those ideas, which were shows of a president trying to evoke bipartisan compromise. That changed again at the end once you heard about veterans. You heard about several other ideas. Then Republicans again got on their feet. There were a few moments of clear tension. In the center of the room were two of the most controversial Republican members. I think viewers saw them: Representative Lauren Boebert of California, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. At one point, when the president was talking about America's wounded and dead warriors, and talked about cancer that could put them in a flag-draped coffin, Representative Boebert shouted out, and she said, "You put them there." 13 of them, even as the president was about to speak about his own son, who, of course, served his country in the military and also died of cancer. And that was a moment you could see other Republicans looking at her and sort of casting her a look of saying, you went too far. I don't know that she felt that way, but it was one of the few moments of real rancor that we had in this speech, which is significant because last year, I have to say, entering this chamber not that long after January 6th, and remember, a year ago, the speech a year ago, we had just finished up an impeachment trial. So that was a moment where there were bitter feelings in this chamber. I didn't sense that tonight, except in just those couple of instances. One other thing, there were Republicans waiting to try and speak to the president, but I think he spent so much time on the Democratic side, I'm not sure many of them made it over there.
That's interesting. Lisa Desjardins in the House chamber and able to have a view of what is going on that we don't have. We are depending on the television camera that we call the feed that we get, and we are dependent on those as our eyes into the chamber. And Lisa, thank you for clarifying. It was hard for me, at least, to hear what was said. I could hear at one point before the president spoke about cancer, about his son's death, that someone shouted something in the chamber, but I couldn't hear what it was. So thank you for clarifying that. As we watch the president leave, I want to bring in our Jeff Bennett, who's at the White House tonight and who knows some of what went into this speech. Jeff, listening to what Pete Wehner said about this really was not a redirection for the president, that he seemed to go back and repeat many of the priorities that we heard about in year one. Mm-hmm. Was there a debate at the White House about how much of that to put in the speech?
There was, and I can tell you, Judy, that based on my reporting, given the moment in which we are in, world events, the pandemic, inflation at a 40-year high, the president with record low for him anyway, approval ratings, you could argue that the president had delivered this speech at such a fraught moment. I mean, not since 2003 when George W. Bush used his State of the Union address to make the case for war in Iraq, or fast forward a few years later to 2010 when President Barack Obama was delivering his State of the Union address at a time of a global recession. never since then has a president found himself in the kind of moment in which President Biden finds himself tonight. And so the thinking was that it was important, at least in framing his domestic agenda, was to sort of reframe this idea and not focus so much on the crisis, but find ways to turn the crisis into an opportunity. In fact, the president used that very phrase. And so what I thought was really interesting was that he went back and he talked about the American Rescue Plan. And the reason why he did that, he talked about the child tax credit, the stimulus checks that went out to Americans who qualified, the money in there that allowed schools to open safely. One of the reasons why he did that was because there were so many centrist Democrats who voted for that bill who felt like the White House didn't focus enough on that at the time. And that the American people, by and large, and this has shown up in opinion polls, didn't have a good sense of what was included in that and didn't know what the president and what Democrats did. And so as a result of that, they weren't giving the president credit for it. Fast forward to the Build Back Better Act. Tonight you heard the president talk about caps on insulin prescription medication. He talked about making child care more affordable, making elder care more affordable. All of those things are included in his Build Back Better legislation, but the president never once tonight used that name. The White House believes, they say, it's because the specific policies are more important than what that legislation is called or how it is packaged. We'll have to see whether or not Senator Joe Manchin will be more inclined to vote for one-off bills as opposed to, an overall package, because if he, of course, has been the major obstacle in getting that package across the finish line. And then beyond that, the president also, I thought, tried to capture some rhetorical ground from Republicans. He talked about the importance of securing the border, the importance of funding the police. And as Lisa mentioned, he spent a good portion of the speech talking about making more products here in America as a way of raising wages and countering inflation. So yeah, there was an internal debate about how to frame the domestic agenda, and it might have sounded like a laundry list, but it's in large part because the White House believes they have so much work to do in educating the American people about what their plans are and how they would be beneficial to everyday Americans.
Really, really interesting, and so interesting that, as Lisa said, even when the president was talking about things that one might think Republicans might be interested in having conversations with the White House about, whether it was more jobs, more manufacturing jobs in America, the conversation, as you just said, about immigration, it's not clear that Republicans were showing their support. And as you mentioned, on funding the police, the president made a point to say it 3 times, don't defund the police, fund the police, and he said it 3 times in a row. We're still watching President Biden talking with members of Congress as he leaves the chamber. They seem to be Democrats, to my eye, who are still there trying to have a word with him. Our Amna Nawaz is there in the Capitol complex. She's in the Cannon House office building. Amna, you were saying earlier that you'd been talking to Ukrainians who were going to be staying up late tonight to listen to what the president had to say about Ukraine. What do you think they heard that would either lift their spirits or not tonight?
Well, I'll tell you, Judy, right off the bat, the thing that most heartened them, that really impressed them, surprised them, was that the president opened what is largely a domestic messaging opportunity with Ukraine, speaking directly to the Ukrainian people, hailing them for working so hard to fight and defend their democracy and their freedom. I got a number of messages of people noticing just how many lawmakers were wearing yellow and blue and waving the Ukrainian flags. A few lines that stood out to a few people they sent to me here. Putin can send tanks into Ukraine but can never conquer the hearts of Ukrainians. These are the kind of things that they said really resonated with them, and that for the many who probably did not stay up till 4 a.m. there to watch this speech, they say that will probably be very emotional for many Ukrainians when they wake up in a few hours and begin to hear this. But I'll also mention, one of the challenges we saw for the president going into this speech was with all this confluence of issues and major crises, foreign and domestic, how he was going to thread the needle and message in one coherent speech. And I actually found a number of opportunities where it seemed like the president was quite deft at doing that. He was really linking some of the challenges abroad with the challenges here and showing how America's place in this world is changing and how the two depend on each other. And he talked about defending Ukrainians as defending freedom, and even though the impacts would be felt here at home, why it's necessary for the larger case and strength of democracy in the world. Returning to this familiar theme we've heard him talk about before, right? About in a time of rising autocracies, as he mentioned, the battle between democracies and autocracies, democracies are rising to the moment. That's a theme we've heard from him before, going back to the January 6th anniversary speech and to his inauguration speech. But he also talked about domestic investments here in the U.S. in infrastructure and how those will allow America and American companies and the American economy to compete on the global stage, specifically with China. So there was quite a bit of linking going on there between some of these issues that some people thought might be quite difficult to connect in one speech. The last thing I'll mention is the time spent. Obviously, that is sort of a messaging in and of itself, and how many minutes the president speaks on each of these issues. He did open with Ukraine and foreign policy, spent about 10 minutes on that, and then, as we saw, moved into the pandemic and largely the economy and inflation and infrastructure and domestic investments, and that was the bulk of his speech. And that is, of course, in response to the fact that that is chief of most Americans' minds. That is a top concern for his primary audience, which is the American public. The last thing I'll mention, though, Judy, is that one message I got from one Ukrainian who was watching as the speech unfolded was not surprised. The president went on to spend as much time on COVID and the pandemic and the economy, and she said this, which was, you know, it's strange to think that up until February 24th, even the top things on our minds here in Ukraine were the pandemic and the economy, and how much the world has completely changed in just the space of 1 week. Judy?
No question, and that is again a reminder, Amna, of how much a State of the Union address is tied to the moment. If this speech had been given, in fact, normally State of the Union addresses come earlier in the year. This was moved later for a number of reasons, COVID having something to do with it. If it had come several weeks ago, it would have been before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That wouldn't have been the theme, we presume, that it became tonight. There would have been different words about COVID. Today, the United States observed 950,000 Americans have died from COVID, more than any other nation on the planet. And that wouldn't have been, surely the president would have spoken about COVID, but tonight he was able to talk about it, but he was able to say, we've lost so many in our midst, but we are moving beyond it, and we need to continue to be vigilant. And he talked about vaccinations and treatments and helping the rest of the world. But this was a speech that had to reflect the moment. I want to come back to you, Jonathan Capehart, and I also want to tell our audience that in just a few moments we will be bringing you the Republican response. It's going to be delivered by the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, and we'll take that just as soon as it gets underway. But in the meantime, Jonathan, I want to come back to you because we spoke a moment ago about the president tying democracy together at the beginning and the end of the speech. And of course, we're all wanting to jump ahead. What are people going to most remember about this speech? Is it going to be the rallying the American people behind the Ukrainians, or is it going to be the list of priorities that the president said the American people, he hopes, will find important, and that he hopes the two political parties will come together to work on?
Well, I'm looking at it this way, Judy. The Ukraine portion of the speech and the end of the speech were emotional. They got you here. We're all focused on what's happening in Ukraine, but also as it's being explained to the Ukrainian people, but to the world by their president, by President Zelensky. And he has captured the American people's imagination, a leader standing up for his country, not running away, but leading them through an invasion, through a war. And I think people will remember that because of the emotional resonance. But I also think, and this is where I disagree with what Pete said earlier, you might not like the laundry list of things, that the president talked about he was doing, and I don't think he was looking too much for credit. There's knowledge out there that the American people want to know and needed to know that the president understood the bite that inflation is taking out of these wage increases that they've been seeing, the bite that those high gas prices have been taking out of their paychecks, and wanted to know, one, he recognizes it, but two, want to know, well, what you're gonna do about it. And that's where I think once the emotion of the Ukraine portion of the speech wears off, folks will then think, well, what did he say about the economy? What did he say about COVID? What did he say about any number of things that might be individually important to various folks in the American public, whether it's the folks who are worried about crime, whether it's transgender Americans or their parents who are living in Texas and worried about the state government investigating them. So I think the president did what he needed to do for the various audiences he was talking to in the United States and around the world.
And then the question remains, how much will his appeal to unity be reminded, and what will the response be to that? So we are now just seconds away from the governor of the state of Ohio, Kim Reynolds, and let's go to that as soon as we get the picture.
Good evening. I'm Kim Reynolds, governor of the great state of Iowa. Like you, I just watched the president's address. I listened as the governor of our state, as a mom and a grandmother of 11 who's worried our country is on the wrong track. We're now 1 year into his presidency, and instead of moving America forward, it feels like President Biden and his party have sent us back in time to the late 70s and early 80s, when runaway inflation was hammering families, a violent crime wave was crashing our cities, and the Soviet Army was trying to redraw the world map. Even before taking the oath of office, the president told us that he wanted to, quote, make America respected around the world again, and to unite us here at home. He's failed on both fronts. The disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal did more than cost American lives. It betrayed our allies and emboldened our enemies. North Korea is testing missiles again at an alarming rate. The Speaker of the House recently warned our Olympic athletes not to speak out against China. And now Russia has launched an unprovoked, full-scale military invasion of Ukraine, an attack on democracy, freedom, and the rule of law. Now all Americans must stand united in solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine as they courageously defend their country against Putin's tyranny as they fight for their freedom. But we shouldn't ignore what happened in the run-up to Putin's invasion, waiving sanctions on Russian pipelines while eliminating oil production here at home, focusing on political correctness rather than military readiness, reacting to world events instead of driving them. Weakness on the world stage has a cost, and the president's approach to foreign policy has consistently been too little, too late. It's time for America to once again project confidence. It's time to be decisive. It's time to lead. But we can't project strength abroad if we're weak at home. And that's what I want to discuss with you tonight. The President and Democrats in Congress have spent the last year either ignoring the issues facing Americans or making them worse. They were warned that spending trillions would lead to soaring inflation. They were told that their anti-energy policies would send gas prices to new heights, but they plowed ahead anyway, raising the price at the pump by 50% and pushing inflation to a 40-year high. 4 decades ago, when our nation was last reeling from inflation, I was a young working mom just starting out. My husband Kevin worked days while I watched our girls, and then we would literally switch. We would pass in the yard as he was coming home, and I was leaving to work evenings at the local grocery store. From across that checkout counter, I saw the pain of inflation on my neighbors' faces. I saw what happens when prices rise faster than wages. The Biden administration believes inflation is a, quote, high-class problem. I can tell you, it's an everybody problem. I saw moms and dads' paychecks buy them less and less. I watched working people choose which essentials to take home and which ones to leave behind. And now President Biden's decisions have a whole new generation feeling that same pain. When I took the oath of office 5 years ago, I promised Iowans that I would never lose sight of who I was working for, that I wouldn't become detached from the problems they were facing, from the problems that I had faced myself. But you don't have to check groceries to see what high inflation does to people. You just need to step outside of the DC bubble. Talk to Americans about what's on their mind. Ask them, what are your concerns? What keeps you up at night? And they'll tell you. And I can tell you what's not on that list. They won't tell you that spending trillions more and bankrupting their children is the answer to their problems. They won't tell you that we should be paying people not to work. And they certainly won't tell you that we should give billions in tax giveaways to millionaires and billionaires in Democrat-controlled states like California, New York, and New Jersey. But that's what the Biden administration has been pushing for over the last year. And that's all part of Build Back Better. Thankfully, the president's agenda didn't pass because even members of his own party said enough is enough. Well, the American people share that view. Enough is enough. And it's not just with DC spending. Americans are tired of a political class trying to remake this country into a place where an elite few tell everyone else what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot believe. They're tired of people pretending the way to end racism is by categorizing everybody by their race. They're tired of politicians who tell parents they should sit down, be silent, and let government control their kids' education and future. Frankly, they are tired of the theater, where politicians do one thing when the cameras are rolling and another when they believe you can't see them, where governors and mayors enforce mandates but don't follow them, where elected leaders tell their citizens to stay home while they sneak off to Florida for sun and fun, where they demand that your child wear a mask, but they go maskless. So you've heard the excuses. They were just holding their breath, but it's the American people who are waiting to exhale, waiting for the insanity to stop. We now live in a country where violent crime is out of control. Liberal prosecutors are letting criminals off easy, and many prominent Democrats still want to defund the police. You know, it seems like everything is backwards. The Biden administration requires vaccines for Americans who want to go to work or protect this country, but not for migrants who illegally cross the border. The Department of Justice treats parents like domestic terrorists, but looters and shoplifters roam free. The American people are left to feel like they're the enemy. This is not the same country it was a year ago. The president tried to paint a different picture tonight, but his actions over the last 12 months don't match the rhetoric. It's not what he promised when he took office. But it doesn't have to be that way. There is an alternative. Across the nation, Republican governors and legislators are showing Americans what conservative leadership looks like, what it means to respect the people we serve, to hear them out, to stand up for them and walk alongside them. We know that our problems require bold action, but we also know that bold action doesn't have to mean government action. It's Americans making their own decisions for their own families and future. Republican governors faced the same COVID-19 virus head-on. But we honored your freedoms and saw right away that lockdowns and school closures, they came with their own significant cost, that mandates weren't the answer. And we actually listened to the science, especially with kids in masks and kids in schools. What happened and is still happening to our children over the last 2 years is unconscionable. Learning loss, isolation, anxiety, depression. In so many states, our kids have been left behind, and so many will never catch up. That's why Iowa was the first state in the nation to require that schools open their doors. I was attacked by the left, I was attacked by the media, but it wasn't a hard choice. It was the right choice. And keeping schools open is only the start of the pro-parent, pro-family revolution that Republicans are leading in Iowa and states across this country. Republicans believe that parents matter. It was true before the pandemic, and it has never been more important to say out loud. Parents matter. They have a right to know and to have a say in what their kids are being taught. Families also have every right to live in a safe and a secure community, and that begins with a safe and secure country. But the Biden administration has refused to secure our border. They've refused to provide the resources to stop human trafficking, to stop the staggering influx of deadly drugs coming into our neighborhoods. They've refused to protect you. With Texas and Arizona leading the way, I, along with Republican governors from several states, have sent resources to the border. And we've actually gone to the border, something that our president and vice president have yet to do since taking office. On the economy, the contrast couldn't be more stark. While Democrats in D.C. are spending trillions, sending inflation soaring, Republican leaders around the country are balancing budgets and cutting taxes, because we know that money spent on Main Street is better than money spent on bureaucracy. Today, I signed legislation that eliminates Iowa's tax on retirement income and sets our tax rate at 3.9%. That's less than half of what it was just 4 years ago. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that out of the top 20 states with the lowest unemployment rates, 17 have Republican governors. Republicans may not have the White House, but we're doing what we can to fill the leadership vacuum. And on the issues that are affecting Americans, Republicans are leading. We're standing up for parents and kids. We're standing up for life. We're keeping our communities safe and thanking those in uniform. We're fighting to restore America's energy independence, and that includes biofuels. We're getting people back to work, not paying them to stay home. Most of all, we're respecting your freedom. Behind me stands Iowa's Capitol, where we display our state motto, our liberties we prize and our rights we will maintain. And those aren't just empty words.